And so I need to think about the requirements of a map of sociology. I think it should logically organize coherent stacks of sociological literature. And this word stacks, it's like a metaphor for the stacks of papers that might accumulate in an academic's desk. This metaphor doesn't actually make any sense because a given bookshelf, bookshelves are highly specific, they're highly specialized. So you would have some very general work, really a collection of them, probably textbooks, other things you encountered in graduate school maybe. You got some other more specific ones. Yeah, and I guess I want to find patterns in these bookshelves, so to speak. But because it's a metaphor, an analogy, I can extend it to other things. So, it doesn't just have to be stacks of books. It can be stacks of statements. You can call it statements in the sociologists' repertoire, their mental bookshelf of things that they know. Well, anyways, this metaphor draws the crucial link to knowledge. And I guess the question, this is close, but I don't think this is the question. How best to visualize this? The question is, what are some good ways to visualize this? This is really a simple question as long as I define, somewhat what I mean by good. But I know that. I said this 3 ways, but I think it communicates as much as possible, objectively. Where objective basically says, my preconceived notions aren't figuring into it. Well, it doesn't really say that because the analogy is a map. And this is, my sense of the word, an objectively shitty map of the US. We now have incredibly good maps. And this is an objectively better map of the United States. But crucially, this doesn't avoid preconceived notions. And this isn't necessarily the way that any person would draw the map of the United States. There's a lot of assumptions baked in. Like the Earth is a sphere. So already you have an analytic choice of what map projection you use to flatten the thing. And here's another objectively best map of the time. Wow. And it communicates crucial structural features, which were measured based on messy tools of observation of sailing ships. Look at Africa. But this is just a different projection of the same thing. This one is not area preserving, for instance. Okay, well here's 4 different projections of the United States. They're only slightly different. I don't know why this one is angled. I'm guessing that this one is equal area preserving, and this one's Mercator. So this one's Mercator. Wow. So it communicates some important structural features, but this is a bit silly. Well, again, it's complicated, I guess. Important depends on our purposes. It depends on what we want to do with the map. But this isn't really a problem, because this map is useful for so many things. Is that true? This is a macro conception of the United States. What exactly is this useful for? It's only for macro consideration. It's only interesting if you want to travel, or to put a smaller map into context. If you want to make your way around, you have to zoom way, way, way in. All right, so this is a much more useful map for me. So what does a map like this look like for knowledge? I guess my expectation is that there's many useful maps. I'm going to watch this again. This was my original idea for what a map would look like. I think time probably goes this way. So we get time. We should have research specialties sort of broken up like this. And this really is just a co-citation graph where they are arranged based on the year that they were published. So it should be clustering by these attributes. C.C, which I like the idea of having clusters, stacks with shape, but I feel like I'm already assigning some structure to what I'm going to see here. I know that there's some structure. I know that there are groups of citations which are cited together because they're towards a more general aim, and they're typically cited at the beginning. Like if you exclude, I don't know if I want to exclude methods just yet. But if we think explicitly, I really want to call these parentheses my stacks. And I think it'll be a pretty simple structure. So, I mean, if one of these, this is a citation right here. Now, these are citations. And you can already see why I'm saying there's, well, maybe you can't see. So, and yeah, there have been more recent additions to the story. The story is an indexical expression referring to what I'm talking about, the analysis of mortality, life course, etc. in terms of citations. So I get this stack which studied the same thing. And this stack is incomplete, so we should be able to see other offshoots that I miss. But looking in these parentheses, and maybe more generally looking in, these are just physically close together. And this is a funny case because these are two footnotes, but it seems like that should work well. You know, this isn't necessarily in the same stack as this. I mean, maybe it's in the same warehouse, but it's not in the same stack. Right, so this is some empirical reality, something which I can point to. This is the structure. This is the neighborhood that I've walked through. So with the analogy to physical maps, like it would be immediately evident that this map was useful to me if I didn't know anything about the practicalities of living, if I just had to live without it in this environment. So after the immediate experiences of, following this trail, of wandering this cemetery, and of exploring campus, seeing this would immediately connect previously disconnected items, and it really would make the whole thing make sense. It would make the structure of all of my immediate experiences with these things, my peripheral walks through this landscape, peripheral, and my walks through this landscape, they would make them cohere into a single narrative, and suddenly I would be able to navigate much better through this environment. I think that completes the analogy. I think that works. Yeah, sure. Every work should be on a strict timeline of when that work was published. And then they also should be clustered. I'm reminded of this tool, the SitNet Explorer. It looks like it does this. And I've actually done this in-text citation analysis. So I have groups, and they're totally separate from one another, of things that were cited in the same parentheses as each other. It's just, wait, why is this so sparse? Oh, it's not as sparse as I thought. So I just take this, which I already have, and fix the time axis. So I want it to look like this, where I can see time progressing. Okay, but that's not it. So, right. Let's have this network and say it's magically been oriented according to time, but there's still a good clustering method going on. So then I basically need labels for these things. So what is this thing? What is this thing? What is this thing? And these labels can be constructed somewhat generally. Not generally, inductively. I guess all that I mean is that each of these links is actually some in-text citation. This thing was cited with this other thing, but there's some words right here. So reports relatively high accuracy using just, well, this isn't a co-citation. And there's some words here. In some cases, tests of these theories summarize millions of articles published in the last century. Yeah, and in some sense, the context of this isn't just the single substantiating phrase. I mean, if there is a quoted phrase or a piece of terminology, then that would be easily justified. But if it's a vocabulary, a way of speaking, then it basically requires unsupervised clustering, sort of an LDA thing, which clusters these vocabularies together, and then you have to sort of go back and look at these clusters and name them in some reasonable way. But I know NLP has done a lot of work on that recently, but it's probably supervised. Maybe this is keywords. Maybe the keywords of the papers that are citing it, they act as tags. No, this isn't helpful. Okay, I found another one. The results are not great. It's just like it chose a random one. Yeah, it could be it's the keywords which distinguish the citing papers from the population. And basically all you're doing is you're taking like some paper has 10 keywords, and you do a chi-squared test where for each keyword, you have this column has keyword I. This is supposed to be an I, my God. Okay, this is paper 1, paper 2, paper 3. You just go through all of the papers. This is confusing. We basically look at whether having a certain keyword is independent of being in a certain cluster. And you do this for every combination of cluster and keyword. What you end up getting is basically z-scores, which are rejecting that these are independent based on the proportion that have this, that have this, that have both of these. This is exactly what this function does. So you just do two classes. Because I'm in a multi-class, just do two classes. Does it have the keyword or does it not have the keyword? And then the chi-squared value basically represents how confident are we that the class is independent of each of the features. So it'll actually go through every single keyword being present. So anyways, what you get is a group of words that go on each of these clusters. I don't know what you do with that. Visually, how to display this is a mess. But it also would be interesting to do this without labels first, just to observe the overall structure. And one thing you can do is, if I made this a web application where you can click on this and see what paper it is, then I don't really need labels. I can just click on the papers and see what's in them. So if I start seeing patterns, then I can think about how labels could be made. But a good first just push is to get this with time and something I can click and expand details. And thinking further about this analogy, it could be something where I have multiple overlays. I can look at the weather over this, or I can look at, there's lots of different ways that you can look at the connections. I guess look at attributes distributed across the connections. Words, phrases, density, location. So, where was it in terms of journal space? I think this analogy is really helpful. I don't really know who I'm talking to. I'm basically just making this for myself, but if you're somebody other than me and you've made it this far, like the video, leave a comment. I'm legitimately interested in what kept you going.